Hello everyone and welcome to a game you guys started requesting as soon as it finished, and for good reasons. It is former world champion Viswanathan Anand versus Magnus Carlsen in the Blitz section of the Norway chess. It's quite a beauty, you guys will enjoy it. It's been almost 10 years since Magnus took the title away from Anand in 2013, but now in 2022 the games are still as crazy as ever. Even though Anand retired from classical chess, he is still allowing us to enjoy his moves in Blitz games. So let's dive straight into it. Anand has the white pieces and he opens with e4, and Magnus plays g6. He goes for the modern defense, or the Robatsch defense. We have d4, d6, and now knight to c3. Interestingly, Bobby Fischer, in his famous book My 60 Memorable Games, when annotating his game against Benko, says that h4 would be a great attempt here, but he played knight to c3 against Benko, and so does Anand here against Magnus. So bishop to g7, we have bishop to e3, and now a6. But now after a6, Anand doesn't go for the standard queen to d2. He follows Fischer's advice, but only a couple of moves later, and he strikes with h4. We have knight to f6 by Magnus, adding more pressure to this h5 square. We have f3, defending the e4 pawn, and now queen to d2. So the standard, b5 by Magnus, and now queen to d2. So the idea is a standard one, like you would have maybe against a dragon or a super hyper accelerated dragon, where you would just go g4, h5, bishop h6, trade over the bishops, and start some sort of a counter, some sort of an attack with an open h file. So here h5, Magnus of course will not allow this, and now knight to h3. And here Magnus could continue just developing, but he decides to give up this bishop for a knight. Bishop captures on h3. They say that knights are a little bit better in Blitz than bishops, so let's see how Magnus does with the knights. Rook captures on h3, knight b to d7, and here we have castles queenside by Anand. And now there are a couple of games that reach this position, even between some very strong players. For example, Leko had this against Yanni Pomnishi in Beijing in some 10 years ago, in 2013, I believe, where Leko defeated Nepo. Nepo played knight d to b6. And here we have queen to c8 by Magnus, and it is now, as of move 10, that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Anand continues. So of course c5 is coming, the c file will open up, so he goes for the prophylactic king to b1. We have c5, d captures, knight captures, and now knight to e2. Anand remaneuvers the knight over to d4. We have castles by Magnus, and only now bishop to h6, preparing to trade off the bishops. a5 by Magnus. He wants to get those pawns all the way and start opening up files towards the white king. Bishop captures on g7, king captures, and now rook to g3. Getting the rook to a nice g file. b4 by Magnus, and now knight to d4. Now you always have to be careful. Knight to f check, knight to f5 check could be very unpleasant. But here Magnus just plays knight c captures on e4. He gives up a little bit of material to grab a little bit of material. Basically, he will win the rook and two pawns for the two knights. So of course Anand has to accept. There's no other way. F captures. We have knight captures on e4. And now queen to e3. Knight captures on g3, queen captures on g3. And now, as you see, Magnus is up 2 pawns, but Anand has a bishop and a knight for a rook. So Magnus goes straight for a queen trade, queen to g4, and if Anand doesn't want to trade, he has to defend the rook on d1. So queen back to e1. He says my chances are greater with queen still on the board, and rook a to c8. Now it makes sense to double up rooks on the c file and go after the white king. So g3. We have rook to c5, and now bishop to e2, chasing away Carlsen's queen, queen to e4, and now queen to d2. And while you could go rook f to c8 right away, Magnus says nope, this is even stronger. Rook to e5, we put pressure on the bishop, and also queen to e3 will come. So here, bishop to f3, we need to make some room for the queen. Queen to e3, offering a queen trade, and Anand again declines. Queen to g2, and now, well, you could go rook to c8. Magnus goes a4 first. He wants to open up the lines of attack towards the white king, but this allows Anand this very tricky idea of knight to c6. Now just putting pressure on the rook, attacking the pawn here, and also the pawn on e7 is being pressured. And Magnus goes rook to f5. Super interesting would be a3, but of course this is a blitz game, so you don't have all the time in the world to calculate everything. I will just show it because it's very enjoyable. Knight captures on e5, so he gives back the exchange. Queen captures, threatens checkmate, and now c4. Now the queen covers the b2 pawn. B captures on c3 en passant, and now b3. We play c2, we have to give up the pawn to open up this diagonal. Queen captures on c2, and now rook to c8. We bring the rook into the attack, but after the queen moves, let's say we offer a queen trade, queen captures on g3, we end up with this where Anand would be up a bishop, but Magnus would be up 3 pawns. So, and also he would kind of have the attack, but with perfect play, white will hold this. So it's very interesting, but Magnus decides to go for rook f5. He attacks the bishop here, rook to d3, Anand defends it, and it's remarkable that you can just leave the back rank like this. Rook to d3, and I mean the king is on b1. If one check comes, it could be very unpleasant. Luckily, you can just defend. You can just bring the rook back, and this is exactly what happens. Queen e1 check, rook d1, queen back to e3, going for the bishop, and Anand plays rook to d3. He says, all right, if queen to e1, we go for a draw by threefold repetition if you are up for this. But Magnus declines this. He plays queen to c5. He says, I still have some attacking chances. I just have to open up the position here. Knight captures on e7 by Anand, and now rook to e5, attacking the knight, and again going for this rook to e1 square. So knight to d5, and now rook to e1 with check. But now Anand plays bishop to d1. He doesn't allow Magnus to trade off the rooks. Rook f to e8, and now queen to d2. And now it would be now it would be a great idea to play a precise move, because the position is now completely winning for Magnus, but it's a blitz game. Magnus missed the win here. Luckily, you will not, so feel free to pause the video and try to find the winning idea Magnus missed while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding the only move that wins the game. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to g1. That's the good stuff. And now once you see it, of course, you believe it. There is no defense against rook captures bishop. Once rook captures bishop, queen will capture, and then we can just play the other rook to e1, and it's game over. We're going to win the white queen, and that's it. And there's no way for you to defend this. King c1 is nothing, because you're gonna have to capture with the queen. So I mean, we can even show it if you guys like rook e1, and that's it. White just resigns. But Magnus misses this queen to g1 move. He plays a3. He keeps true to his plan to open up the queen side, and now Anand just captures the pawn on b4 and asks, what do you have here? So trading would be good for Magnus, but Magnus plays rook 8 to e4. He now attacks the queen, puts more pressure on White's position, but it doesn't really matter. Anand just captures on c5. Even better would be queen captures on a3, but this is too difficult to calculate with little time on the clock, and Magnus is really low on the clock, so Anand doesn't want to just let him breathe, because here after rook captures on d1 check, rook captures on d1, queen captures on d5. Of course, if rook captures, then you just get checkmated. There's queen c3 check, and that's the problem. Now we cover d1 square, and we are threatening to pick up the queen. So best would be to block with the queen, but now we just trade, and we have these 3 connected pass pawns. White just wins this easily. But okay, queen captures on c5 was played, d captures on c5, and now b captures on a3. And now what do you play here? c4 attacks the rook. We have rook to d2, and now rook to g1. Magnus goes after the g3 pawn. Knight c3 c3 attacks the rook on e4 and rook to e6. And the rook will be a very important defender here, as Anand will start pushing this a pawn. So the rook needs to be covering the a6 square. So a4, we have rook captures on g3 by Magnus, now knight to b5. We have rook to e4 and now pawn to c3. And here Magnus played rook captures on h4, and this is not the way to play this. Anand is much better here, so it's not easy to play this, but with the g5 it's still possible to play. Now if h captures on g5, you just start pushing the h pawn. One thing you don't do is move this rook away from the e file, because you really need to have this rook e6 to a6 maneuver available. But Magnus played rook captures on h4, and now Anand just pushed a5, and that's it. There's no playing this position anymore. Magnus put the rook on h1, but it's actually that his time ran out here, and the game just ended. But it doesn't matter what you play, rook to h1, or even if you play rook to e4, seemingly the best move that kind of hopes to get back to help out with the defense, we still just push. And now, okay, you can play rook to e8, but now knight c7 attacks the rook and also covers the a8 square with tempo. And now after you move the rook, just a7. There's just no move here for Magnus. h4, a8 queen. You have to give up the rook, and now you have two pieces for nothing, and that's just, of course, completely winning for Anand. But yeah, Carlsen's time ran out, and it was in this position that Anand won the game. So very nicely done, coming out of retirement to enjoy some rapid and blitz events and taking down the reigning world champion. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and congratulations to everyone who spotted that winning idea that was missed in the game. I would like to thank first Elden Lord, Nagarjuna Punugoti, congrats Harry 3 Grads, Andre Theron, and Alexander John Huare for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Norway chess until it ends. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.